Hi there and welcome to the Ichthus Revive 2020 online art workshop. My name is Walter Hine. I'm an artist speaking to you from my studio today, and also I'm a part-time art teacher. I'm involved in a number of different art groups in my local community and in church, where we are very blessed to have an art forum which meets regularly to pray and to encourage one another in our desire to make art and to worship God in doing that. Now, my prayer is that today, if there's anyone watching who has an interest in art but never got around to trying it, or if you're watching today and once upon a time back at school you were drawing and painting, but perhaps a teacher or somebody close to you was a little bit harsh and critical, and so you gave it up, all right? Or perhaps other priorities in life welled up, as they do, and crowded out the art. So I pray that today you'll be encouraged and inspired to pick up your pencil or your pen or paintbrush again and push through that resistance and that self-doubt and those negative voices from the past, which are so well known by everybody who pursues creative activities. In fact, I don't think I know one artist who hasn't at some point doubted themselves and has wondered what on earth they're doing, okay? And we're going to have a great time today, and I promise you that you're not just going to be watching me talking the whole time. Now, as I began to plan this workshop with the title, Seeing Beauty, Drawing as a Way of Seeing, a memory sprang to mind, and I remember a time in my early 20s when I was studying art at university. I was drawing and painting so much that even when I wasn't painting, when I was hanging out with my parents or driving in a car, I wasn't just looking anymore. I realized I was really seeing things for the first time. And I noticed all the textures and colors that were in this, like just looking at my dad, I noticed the textures and colors in his skin and in his hair. And I couldn't look at people without imagining what kind of a paintbrush could I use to accurately model that nose or that chin. I would look at clouds, and as for many of us probably, in my mind clouds were just white. But I began to discover all the amazing subtle shades and tones that are in clouds simply because I was mixing colours to paint clouds a lot of the time. Now, it was as if the blinkers had fallen away from my eyes, and I think this experience is a little bit what it's like when we become Christians, isn't it? For the first time in our lives, we start to see things with spiritual eyes. Maybe you can remember the first time that you read the Bible after your conversion experience, and realizing that it's alive to you. And I'd like to share with you one of my favorite passages of scripture which seems to speak of this kind of opening up and seeing things for the first time. Before I read at this point, I'd love to commit this time to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this time together, Lord. I pray that those watching and those listening, Father, will their imaginations and their eyes will be opened up to what you are saying to them, Lord. I pray, Lord, that you will show us things clearly and freshly today, Father. And if there are any voices or any bad experiences in the past, I pray that you would wash them from all of us. In the name of Jesus. Amen. So the passage I'd like to share with you is from Psalm 36, verses 7 to 10. How precious is your loving kindness, O God, and the children of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They drink their fill of the abundance of your house, and you give them to drink of the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. O continue your loving kindness to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright in heart. Isn't that a wonderful passage? It shows God's love filling all of creation. And then it speaks of his delight and his blessing in blessing his people. Now, I'd like to point out particularly that verse 9. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. It always reminds me that just like without sunlight, we would not see the amazing colours and forms and reflections of the world around us. So without God's light in our hearts, we would be in darkness. We wouldn't be able to see God at work, and God at work in the world and in the people around us. So as we draw today, I would love it if you would have your spiritual eyes and ears open to what potentially God is saying. Try to think a bit deeper about the symbolism in how and what you are drawing. For example, it might help if you simply think about sunlight. Sunlight shines on everything we see, and sunlight can be a bit like the light of God, because His loving kindness, like sunlight, reaches to every area of creation, like we've just read. And so the Lord wants to speak to us and highlight things to us, even as we draw very ordinary things. Now, in a minute, I'm going to give you some ideas for our drawing project today, and I'll be demonstrating and drawing along with you right here at my easel. So, before I do that, I'd like to point out some specific things that I'd like you to try to keep in the back of your mind while we're drawing. There are 3 C's, alright? Number 1, composition. Be aware of your composition. In other words, think about how and where you place things on your page. Think of your page as like a window frame into another scene. How are you going to fill that scene? Do you want a calm composition or an exciting composition? Diagonal lines make a dynamic composition. Think of a vase of flowers. The flowers go out. Why do we like that? Why do fireworks excite us? Because there are lots of diagonals, all right? But horizontal and vertical lines, we like those because they calm us down. Why do we have landscape paintings in our sitting rooms? Okay, so I've got an example here. It's a little bit crude, but I've drawn a still life scene, and I've used mostly vertical lines and horizontal lines to draw it. And I've drawn the exact same scene again with lots of diagonal lines. Okay, so the same scene drawn in 2 different ways. Okay. Another thing to consider in your composition is if you draw something at the top of your page, it has a very different feel and message to drawing it near the bottom of the page. If you draw something exactly in the middle, like I've just drawn this apple here, apple on a table, it can come across as a little bit static and boring. Whereas if you draw it perhaps a little bit nearer the edge of the page, it starts to tell a story. There's a bit of a dynamic there. Could that apple be toppling off the edge? Okay. And then the second C is contrast. Be aware of contrasts. For example, as humans, we find a scene very satisfying if it's got varying light and dark tones. Right? So use contrast to catch the eye and make your drawing more interesting. Right? So any contrasts that you can think of are probably valid. Big next to small, light next to dark, rough surfaces next to smooth surfaces, messy or smudged marks, as you've seen in some of these. All right? Messy or smudged marks next to sharp and clean marks. The more you can control these contrasts, the more interesting your artwork will become. Alright, so the third one is try to think deeper, channel that composition and those contrasts to make your drawing interesting. Try and think about what your drawing is saying. Okay? So don't worry too much about trying to remember every little point that I've just mentioned, as these are things that definitely develop the more you draw and paint. But just try to keep those 3 main points in the back of your minds. It's 3 C's: composition, how you build your drawing up; contrast, how you use small v big, light next to dark, and so forth. And then thirdly, channel those 2. Try to make them work together to make your drawing say something and mean something perhaps a bit more deep. Okay. Now, I'd like us to take as an inspirational starting point 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 20. So, alright, so that's 2 Timothy 2, verse 20. Now, in a large house, there are not only gold and silver vessels, but also vessels of wood and of earthenware, and some to honor and some to dishonor. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from these things, he will be a vessel for honor, sanctified, useful to the master, prepared for every good work. Now, I'm assuming that many of us are at home today, so I'd like you to try to find 4 or 5 cups or vases or any kinds of vessel that you can easily put in front of you to draw. Okay, the Bible in that verse speaks about vessels as metaphors for people. So try to find as many various vessels that you can, but not that many, only about 4 or 5, maximum 5 or 6, okay, that you can easily put on the table or a surface in front of you to draw. Okay, try to find a combination of small or big containers, perhaps things like coffee mugs, egg cups, perhaps also some see-through things, and non-see-through things like vases. Okay, so you can stop your video now while you go and look for those things. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, brilliant. So I hope you've all been able to find your vessels. Try to think about how you're going to arrange them is next, so that it becomes a pleasing scene. If you think about your containers as people, what happens when you put them closer together? So have a little play, all right? See what happens when you put things in front of others, when you put them behind. Okay. Also, it would be very helpful if you would be able to use a light source somehow. So perhaps a table lamp or something to highlight your arrangement. Right, so I've got one here. If you're outside, then the daylight would be perfect. So why don't you stop the video again just for a few minutes, have a little play and just work out what arrangement you want to use, and then we'll get going with drawing. Okay, so now we're ready to start drawing. I'm going to start mapping out my drawing, and then I will stop and comment as we go along. And to start with, do use a phone or a camera if you can to photograph your arrangement, because it's very possible that if you have a cat or a small child around, that something will be knocked over and moved. But also, if later on you've got to clear your arrangement away, you'll have that photo available if you want to carry on drawing. So secondly, please draw very lightly to start. Okay, I can't stress this enough. If you draw lightly and gradually build up your drawing, all those light lines that you've added will actually start later to add to the feel and interest of the piece. Okay, there's nothing worse than starting a drawing too darkly and then you've got an indentation on the paper and it's very hard to rub out a dark line. Okay, so I'm going to start drawing, and why don't you follow along with your picture while this is, and in fact stop this video while you're carrying on drawing yourself. Okay, now that you've laid the groundwork, you might find that your drawing needs just a bit more detail or structure in the composition. Perhaps then consider using the background in the room that you're in, or include bits of furniture in your drawing. And the rule here is that you're not actually cheating if you change things as you go along. Okay, try not to have a rigid mindset. Perhaps there are things in your scene that you will want to leave out. Perhaps there are areas where you want to add something. Okay, remember to use contrast. That's one of the important things. Maybe you'll find that you need to fill a gap, and so why not bring in another vessel or a container to fill that gap. And then once you're happy with your layout, start to press a bit harder. Okay, start to draw in those shadows, okay? I always tell students, when they don't know how to start, when they don't know what to do next, I tell students to look at the scene with half closed eyes. Try to peer through your eyelashes, and when you do that, you will very easily see what the darkest areas are, where the darkest shadows are, and where the highlights are. Okay? And then once you've identified those areas, and especially the darker areas, then you can focus on trying to fill those darker areas in. Okay, and then start to emphasize them in your drawing. Alright, so let's press on. I'm sure your drawing is starting to look great. At this point, I'm going to add some colour to my drawing. So if you've got pastels or coloured pencils or watercolours, colour is a great way to add further meaning and interest to your drawing, and it adds further contrast too. You can use contrasting colours. But it's not always right to add colour. You might feel that your drawing is finished without the colour, but do consider it. Again, start to add colour tentatively in the same way that you started drawing earlier on. Add colours lightly, and then as you become more confident about the colours, start adding more and more layers and make them bolder as you go along. And another thing I'd like to say is try to mix your own colours. Try not to use the colours directly out of the colour palette or directly out of the tube. It's much more interesting if you can layer your colours or mix fresh colours. So in other words, use red and blue to make a purple, or consider adding a bit of yellow to your blue to make it slightly more green. It just varies the colours and makes the colours much more personal to you. And the same goes for using coloured pencils or pastels or things like that. You can layer the colours so that, for example, if you put blue down first and then put yellow on top, it makes a beautiful green. Okay, brilliant. I'm going to add some paint, do some painting now, which will be filmed. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and then I'll see you again on the other side. Well, there you go. We've reached the end of our drawing time. I hope you've really enjoyed it as much as I have. Mine's a little bit rough and ready, but I'm going to carry on. I'm going to try and finish it off a little bit better. And I hope that you've really enjoyed drawing today, and most of all that you feel inspired by what you've done. I'm sure that the Lord's been speaking to you as you've been drawing. Please do keep going, and just as an idea for another project, why don't you go around your neighborhood for a walk, take a camera or your phone and photograph anything that is of interest to you. It could be just a puddle, it could be a crack in the road, it could be a bit of paint peeling off an old door, or in fact it could be a sunset. Only you will find certain things beautiful and of note, and it's up to you to document that and perhaps bring it to life in a drawing or a painting. Okay, and please don't forget, if you're willing, an email address should be appearing round about now on your screen. Please do send your drawing or any other drawings that you do after this, if you're willing, to the Ichthus office, because I'd love to see those drawings, and I'm sure it'd be great if we could share them so that others who've been drawing as well will be able to see them. Thanks so much for joining me. It's been a great privilege for me to bring this workshop, and happy drawing. God bless. Bye.